in the newsroom. Before the Arab Spring, there was Iraq where there were painstaking efforts by the U.S. to set up multi-party rule after the ouster of Saddam Hussein. Last week, as the last GIs were packing, Barack Obama was inviting the Iraqi Prime Minister to the White House, where he praised Nouri al-Maliki for leading, quote, Iraq's most inclusive government yet. That was last week. 24 hours after the departure of the last U.S. troops, Maliki, leader of the Shiite-led bloc in parliament, called for the arrest of the country's Sunni vice president on charges he ran hit squads targeting rivals within the government. Why does this announcement come at this particular moment in time? What's making Maliki tick? And what is the future of democracy in Iraq, both in light of that U.S. pullout and of the uprising in the Arab world? Today in the France 24 debate, Iraq on its own. And joining us from London, Abdulhamir Alwan, who ran as an independent candidate in Iraq's last general election. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Also with us, France 24's James Andre, just back from Baghdad and points north. We'll be talking about that in a moment.
Absolutely.
Dave Clark, who ran the Baghdad bureau for the French news agency AFP. What were your years again, Dave?
I was there 2006, 2007, and I was back in 2008 just as a reporter.
All right,
so I was, in total, I did about 14 months.
Okay, and also with us, Julian Howarth. He's taught at Yale University a graduate seminar on the Iraq crisis every year since 2003. I imagine you've had to revise the syllabus quite a bit.
Every year since 2003.
Okay. His books on Iraq include Muqtada al-Sadr and the Shia Insurgency from the Irish city of Cork. Welcome to Patrick Coburn of The Independent.
Hello.
And you can also join us. You too can join in on the conversation on the France 24 debate Facebook page and also on Twitter, where our handle here is @FrancoisF24. Now, once again, it was 24 hours after the pullout of the last U.S. troops. The Iraqi Ministry of Interior broadcasting confessions. Two bodyguards of Tariq al-Hashemi claimed the Sunni vice president paid people in order to carry out assassinations and bombings in Baghdad. No way, insists their boss.
Al-Maliki is behind the whole issue. The country is in the hands of al-Maliki. All the efforts that have been made to reach national reconciliation and to unite Iraq are now gone. So yes, I blame al-Maliki.
Well, this Wednesday we heard the rebuttal of the Prime Minister. He insists it's not politics, but a case of crime for the courts. And he also added this warning to those inside his coalition government who might be bent on boycotting the next cabinet meeting.
A minister cannot shirk his responsibilities. If he doesn't show up at the cabinet meeting, he has to resign. Every minister, even those from Iraqia, have to attend. At the next meeting, we will replace those who are not there.
Patrick Coburn, why is this all coming to a head so fast?
Well, the American pullout probably has something to do about it. There was also what Maliki claims was an attempt to assassinate him about 3 weeks ago. A bomb was placed outside the Iraqi parliament in the middle of the green zone. And it's been, he suggested that Tariq al-Hashemi's bodyguards had a role in this, and that seems to have detonated this. But you have to bear in mind the extreme distrust between elements of this so-called inclusive government, which was set up exactly a year ago, that it's meant to be a power-sharing government, but in fact its members are extremely hostile towards each other. And Maliki himself has been trying to monopolize power by his acting defense and interior minister. Those two ministries are wholly Shia-dominated. He's been appointing acting divisional commanders in the army, excluding any other Iraqi political leaders. So all these tensions have been increasing over the year, and suddenly they've exploded. I mean, I think many people expected this, but not many expected it to happen so early.
Abdullah Amir Awan, do you agree that Maliki is carving out his turf after the departure of the Americans?
Actually, I think there is a misunderstanding of the power-sharing concept between the two parties. The Prime Minister Maliki thinks that the power sharing between Al-Iraqi bloc and the National Alliance, this power sharing already done because the parliament being taken by the Iraqi and the Speaker of Parliament from Iraqi, the government get a lot of ministers from Al-Iraqi, and all the powers being divided between all blocs who win in the last election, whatever their size in that parliament. So his understanding to the power sharing is already done. But from the Iraqi concept, that they want al-Maliki to ask for their advice in any step he wants to take, which is impractical and unacceptable in any government, and the Constitution gives the Prime Minister the power to draw the general policy of the government and to implement that policy.
Just the question is, this arrest warrant, is it a power grab on the part of Nouri al-Maliki?
I think you have to put it in the framework of 4 major events happened in the last month or so. The first step is the arrest of Baathists all over Iraq. It's not only in the Sunni regions. There are intelligent information came from the Libyan government that there was a coup d'etat being arranged by the Baathists in Iraq. So there have been a lot of arrests all over Iraq, from the Shia area and from the Sunni area. A lot of them been arrested in Al-Basra, in Nasiriyah, in Amara, whatever, and also in Anbar and Mosul. The second event was the autonomy calls from the Sunni provinces, which is a political and not a security issue. It can be dissolved politically.
And the third and fourth?
The third was while the Prime Minister holding meeting with the President Obama, during this time, his deputy Saleh al-Mutlaq start attacking him verbally in a way which doesn't show that he is his deputy, while it shows clearly that he's his enemy. And that makes him angry, and I think he used his authority to ask for him to be replaced. And this is also a political issue, and it is not a security.
All right, so there's been a build-up.
The fourth main issue, which is not political at all, one of Mr. Hashimi guards or bodyguards arrested in Wasat province. He was
hence the confessions that we saw. Now, I just want to ask about this to Dave Clark as well. On January 3rd, lawmakers are also due to consider Maliki's call to sack the deputy prime minister, Saleh al-Mutlaq. The latter has claimed that Maliki is on par with Saddam Hussein. Mutlaq, who also is a Sunni.
Yes, he's also a Sunni, and he's also from a different parliamentary bloc. But there's been tensions between these men now since I was in Iraq, and since probably long before that. When Parliament meets, it might not even meet fully if the Iraqi bloc decides to block it. In which case, he won't have much problem getting such a vote through Parliament. But he threatened to go beyond that. He's threatened to sack ministers and he doesn't have the authority to sack ministers. Effectively, under the constitution that Iraq has, parliamentary approval is needed to sack most of the ministers. Although the new defence minister is an interim minister, and obviously serves at Maliki's pleasure.
So do you agree with Patrick Coburn that there is an element of power grab on the part of the Prime Minister right now?
Every move that Maliki's made for the past 6 years has been incrementally increasing his power, but I'd say most of his enemies in the Iraqi politics would have done the same thing in his position. There's a lot of paranoia.
All right, James Andre, I want you to just to pick up with you on Abdelamir Alwan was highlighting for us there. When you were in Iraq, you went to Baghdad, but not just Baghdad. You also went to points north and to the so-called Sunni belt, those 3 provinces north of Baghdad. Did you get a sense that things would come undone this fast?
Well, I mean, it is moving very fast. The first province to ask for its autonomy was Salah el-Din. They voted their autonomy on the 27th, of October. While we were there, this is like a week ago, Diyala did the same thing, and there were protests. There have been some quite violent clashes actually in Diyala province, which is a Sunni province, Sunni majority province, but of course there are some Shia there. It's also a province which is one of the most dangerous. There's also Al-Qaeda was very active there, and there are still cells of Al-Qaeda. So we talked to the governor there who said, yes, it's all solved and there are no longer any Al-Qaeda elements there. But the fact of the matter is we were there and we really saw how tight the security is all over the place. So they've asked for their autonomy. And the third one, Al-Anbar, which is the very big pink one on this map.
Which is mostly desert.
Which is mostly desert, but which also has, border with Syria, border with Saudi Arabia. So it's a very big one. It is mostly desert. The town of Ramadi is a town where the Sahwa militias started during the war. In fact, they were former insurgents.
Them cooperating with the U.S. was a turning point
exactly.
in the conflict. So you're in those 3 areas,
exactly.
And you get a sense when you're there of the tension running high?
Well, basically what happened was, first Salah el-Din asked for its autonomy. Now Diyala. Now Al-Anbar said that they were congratulating Diyala for asking for this autonomy, so which means that they say that they could probably ask for their own autonomy very quickly. We spoke to the governors of those 3 provinces, and they were all telling us, the central government is not letting us work. They're not giving us the power that we're supposed to have if we read the constitution. They're saying they're even taking decisions that are problematic for us. So that's on the political front. But for example, Al-Anbar, the Sahwa are still there. I mean, they've all gone into the police and into the army, but I mean, we saw this big demonstration of vehicles and armament, etc. Just when the Americans left, they celebrated the Americans leaving, but it was also a way to show us and the local journalists, how much equipment they actually have. And all that is officially part of the police, but the police is also run quite directly by the sheikhs that started the Sahwa and controlled the Sahwa before the Sahwa was broken up and put into the police. And these people, we've talked to them, and they said, look, if our interests are not taken into consideration, we will take our weapons and we will fight for them. So this is what we were told. So,
all right, so in light of all this, Julian Howarth, did the United States leave too early?
Well, the United States didn't really have any option but to leave on the 31st of December. This was something that the American administration wanted very hard to negotiate, tried to negotiate throughout much of the second half of last year as the deadline was looming, but it came adrift for a whole variety of reasons. There's an internal debate within the United States, an internal debate within Iraq, and at the end of the day, the 2 sides couldn't agree because of the Americans' demand for immunity for anything that American troops who stayed on in Iraq after January 2012 might get up to. So it was never going to work out, and I think actually both sides are relatively relieved that it didn't work out. Al-Maliki, because of everything that's going on there now, and because he would have had a revolt from the Sadrists within the party and the governing coalition. I think Obama, because he can and is indeed already trying to make considerable political and electoral capital out of the sort of successful withdrawal from Iraq within the timetable. So it's not a question of whether, 31st of December was a good date or a bad date. No date would have been a good date, and even if we'd had another 50,000 American troops staying in Iraq for, say, next year or 2 years, it's not at all clear that that would have made any difference. It may well have made matters worse. Probably would have, in fact.
Patrick Coburn, do you agree? There is no such thing as a good pullout?
I agree with that. I think that, it's something that you see continually in the media, particularly in the American media, is did the Americans pull out too early, as if exaggerating the degree of American influence over the last, certainly since 2009. I mean, remember that Iraq had an extraordinary bloody civil war, essentially, between Shia and Sunni, while the Americans had 170,000 troops there, and there wasn't much they could do to stop it or control it. So I think that the idea that when they had a much smaller force there, that they would have had influence to, to have prevented this happening is really to exaggerate the American influence over current political events in Iraq. I mean, this has been building up for some time. I mean, you can sense the sort of tremendous divisions between the leadership. I mean, I was in Baghdad 3 weeks ago, and the leaders I spoke to said, the danger is not really so much at the popular level, but at the leadership level. There's a continual confrontation between the leaders of the main communities.
In a lead editorial entitled "In Iraq, a Return to Old Enmities," the Washington Post warns of the boomerang effect of Obama's praise for Maliki last week, saying both the timing and the televised form of Mr. Maliki's charges against the vice president were blatantly political. They followed what has been a mounting campaign by the prime minister, a Shiite with close ties to Iran, against perceived Sunni enemies. Before we go to the break, James Andre, how dangerous is Iraq circa December 2011?
Well, I mean, while we were there, there were blasts pretty much every day. I mean, one judge was assassinated in Kirkuk while we were there. There was also, there were bombs went off pretty much every day, so that is still true. But it's still a lot less dangerous than it was back in 2007 or 8, when you used to have like up to 1,800 attacks per month. We're down to 50 at the moment. So, it is a lot safer than it was. There is tension. It was the Ashura pilgrimage. So talking about tension between the Sunnis and the Shia, I mean, the whole country is totally covered with flags representing Hussein, the colored flags for the Shia pilgrimage. A lot of, for example, the Christians are not going to be celebrating Christmas very obviously this year. They're going to do it discreetly, they told us, in order to not to, for it not to be provocation towards the Shias. The sheikhs we were talking to in Al-Anbar, for example, or the governors in Diyala, the Sunnis, were saying, we're shocked by what we're seeing now. There's such...
Everyone's on tenterhooks.
Yeah, yes. Well, I mean, there is a lot of tension.
Okay.
You can tell.
James Andre, thanks for being with us. I know you're going to report on to the French set for part 2, but stay with us, because we're going to continue the discussion and look at what it means for the wider Arab world as the France 24 debate continues.